Hello, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Coley. I'm the awards editor at Rotten Tomatoes, and it is my honor to welcome to this conversation some of the cast, filmmakers, and subjects of We Need to Talk About Cosby. First, I'm going to go ahead and get this started because I believe this whole project started as essentially a thought exercise in your life and in your mind about how we sort of grappled with the legacy of Bill Cosby. So, Mr. W. Kamau Bell, sir, talk about those early days when you were just talking about, but maybe not talking about Cosby and how that sort of brought about this project.
This starts with me as a kid in the '70s watching Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids, going, "Oh, I need to be like that guy," and then that sort of sustained me through my life. The Cosby Show, Bill Cosby himself, his philanthropy, and become a stand-up comedian. I need to be like that guy, and then I don't know, sometime around 2004, you go, wait, what's going on? And then suddenly I start to become known and be interviewed. And I realize it's hard to say that Bill Cosby inspired me because of all the stories that were then out there. But then I'm like, but then if I don't say it, it feels like I'm lying about my past or who inspired me. And so that was all, years and years before anybody ever said, would you be interested in directing something about this? So it wasn't until that sit down conversation at Boardwalk with Andrew Freed and Jordy Wynn that we sort of said, oh, this could be a film. But it had already been in my mind for years just because I was a Black comedian in show business trying to navigate Bill Cosby's impact on my life and with the truth of what came out.
Yeah, and I'm going to assume that the folks watching this have seen the entire series, but if they haven't, what I think was so interesting, and you capture it so quickly in the first episode, was the conversations that were happening in the African American community in particular, but more particularly us, how we wanted to talk about it outside of the African American community. And this delicate dance of like, I mean, Roland says it so great in the trailer. You can't talk about Black people in a certain time period without talking about Bill Cosby, but that means you have to talk about Bill Cosby. And that's a thing that I think Black people are especially reticent to do right now. Like, I think there's a large group of us, and I think I would count myself among them, that at the time I was like, Jeremichael Carmichael after the slap is like, I don't want to talk about it. Like that. Like, that's what it is right now.
Mhm.
So talk about how you dealt with that, because this was going to be a mainstream project that was talking with what we like to say is very cookout conversations, very internal Black conversations.
You know, Bill Cosby was a cultural icon for America. As we say in the doc, he wasn't Black America's dad; he was America's dad. So Bill Cosby like defined the mainstream for a long period of time. In the '80s and into the early '90s, if you said who's the biggest star on television, it was Bill Cosby, and no, there was no question it was Bill Cosby. And so I think for me, it was like we're not talking about a niche person here. We're not talking about somebody who is just a part of the Black community. And I think the fact that he wanted to be a mainstream star meant that means it's a mainstream conversation. And the just the and certainly just the sheer number of women who came forward to say that he assaulted or raped them, it was like, this is not a small thing we're dealing with here. So
Mm.
I didn't know how to have the conversation with unless I had it like this, and let's be clear, this wasn't a project that went around Hollywood being sold to every outlet who were being. It was like it was a conversation with Boardwalk that went to a conversation with Showtime, and it just so happened that the exec at Showtime was one of the people who helped get me the job at CNN. So it's like this was just a. It doesn't happen that way in show business all the time. So very quickly, it was like we were in the middle of it, and
Yeah.
so yeah, there was never a choice about, do we want this to be mainstream or should we take it to a small company? It was never about that. It just started to happen, and then we were in it.
Yeah. I will say one of the things that I really loved about the doc, and I think that is from both what you, Katie, and everyone behind the scenes did, was how you brought in the subjects. I thought that was such an interesting way that we got to meet people like Eden as people. And it wasn't until she started telling her story that I even clicked. I just thought she was another part of the talking head. That was such a brilliant and I think unarming thing. And I love the way you did that. But when Eden, when you said yes, you didn't necessarily know anything about how this was going to be portrayed. And I just imagine for you coming to be a part of this, there was just such a level of trust. So talk about how you decided to be a part of this, because telling your story in general was such a brave and incredible thing to do. And we women, I know, had to go through so much for those moments, but then continuing to tell your story and continuing to be as brave as you've been through all of these iterations. I can only imagine maybe one more doc, you might just say, you know what, I'm good. I don't want to do it. So what made you say yes to this one?
I have to say, I just finished watching all 4 episodes just a few minutes ago. And the person, and so I'm having a lot of feelings at the moment. And I haven't watched, I got an opportunity to watch it one time because I was in Italy at the time that it came out. And I talked again because it was Kamau. And I felt I had watched him for years and had come to know him and trust him and his journalism. And I felt that I could talk to him. And that's exactly what we did. I can't remember if it was 5 or 6 hours, but it was somewhere in there. And so by the time, the beat that's used at the top of the tease.
Yeah, the trailer.
The trailer. Yeah, exactly. It's me. And I have friends calling me going, is that how you were talking to Kamau? And I said, yes, at that moment, yes, I was talking to him like that because that's where it landed. But it's, wow, it's a really, I have not watched it in 3 months, 4 months, something like that. It's very painful, very painful. Painful because the deep, Kamau and I, perhaps, and I don't know if you, felt this way, but Kamau and I are not that far distant in age. So I was raised I had 2 working parents. I was raised on Cosby, period. Yeah. So there's a lot of pain to have watched it again. But I trusted Kamau and I just really, really respect and love what he's doing. So I felt I could talk to him.
Can I ask a question?
Oh yeah,
yes, of course. Unless you're asking her.
No, you. We haven't talked in a while. But so are your friends saying like you shouldn't have been talking to me that way, or what are your friends saying?
They were more because I'm quite brash, to be saying to you, so what do you think, Kamau? As if we got into it or something like that, right? Like a scrap. Yeah. And or as if I was coming for you or something, like, and you hadn't sent for me, let's just say it like that. So I had friends saying to me, Jesus, and I said, no. That was, this is a long conversation. This is talking about, that experience that day, because it was a really special time. It's not like I haven't been asked to have, there've been a lot of interviews that have come down the pipeline, and there was a period of time where I didn't want to talk anymore, and I didn't want to be it's more than triggering. There's other stuff that comes with that kind of this story. I don't know, it's unprecedented, right? So it's unprecedented. A bunch of women from 4 or 5 different decades come forward to say, this guy's not so great. I did not come forward and come, when I spoke with Kamau, I shared this. My husband was saying to me, you should say something. And I said, I wasn't raped, and I really, really don't want to be in front of the camera like that. And then finally I had 2 students. I was teaching at the time. I had 2 young female students my age at the time that Cosby had, got me in his dressing room. And they came to me and they said, these producers won't let me audition unless I go out to eat with them. And I literally, we sat and we talked for 2 hours. We held hands. I said, this is what you're going to do, and this is what you're not going to do. And then I went home and I made phone calls right away. And then I decided to share that I had seen a side of Bill Cosby that was absolutely not okay, and not anything like anybody could possibly imagine. So all of these women that people were calling gold diggers, which is just insane if anybody knew anything about the law in most every single state, that it wasn't about that at all. It was about celebrityism, which really needs to be discussed.
Yeah, and that was actually, yeah, go ahead.
No, just celebrityism Cosbys don't get created unless people, I was on a set the other day where the actress was walking towards someone and the sea parted. For what? This is a person who's just working. She's working. She happens to have that job. You're a grip. You're a gaffer. You happen to have that job. They're equally important to this experience. What are you moving out of the way for?
Yeah.
If she was in period costume from 18 something and she had some sort of big billowy thing, okay, I get it, right? I mean, I get it. But this was a contemporary, you understand what I'm saying? And,
no, it does talk about celebrity. And actually, that was the other thing that I think is sort of like the unspoken thing. There's so many unspoken things about the Cosby situation as far as like what people feel comfortable discussing that gets aired out in this. Our fascination with celebrity and how we forgive celebrities, our, protection of idols and pillars within certain communities and how the want to protect that can cause these things. And then also, I just think about the fact that you guys did this in the height of COVID, that you were asking for a very trusting situation on its face, and then an entirely more trusting situation because of the reality. And I know, Katie, that was a huge part of what you're undertaking, in addition to all the other weights that you guys had to put on your back to tell this very relevant and very needy story, like a story that needed to be talked about, needed to be told. You also have to deal with the realities of trying to make it happen in a format that is not conducive to any of that thing, most particularly trust. So talk about how you guys tackled that, and with the fact that your director is also writing, narrating, and doing so many things to make this thing run.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I started on this like March 2nd, 2020. So I had like a week in the office, and then we were out shooting interviews the week the world shut down. So like Kamau and I were like, he was like the last, we like elbow bumped to leave each other like March 13th. And I was like, that's the last human I touched for 4 months. Wow. Back, like we flew home on empty planes, and it was very weird. And then we just kind of like everybody else had to figure out, okay, how do we keep going? How do we keep going? Did remote edit, and then we tried to shoot. I think we shot Eden. I think we shot you like July or August 2020. So we did come back and do some like very remote, socially distanced shoots with like Kamau zooming in, and just kind of kept it local. So, part of the challenge of this series was that there are so many women we could have interviewed. There's over 60. So it's like, how do you pick and choose? Like it felt weird to say like, to cast it, like we just wanted anyone who wanted to speak to us to be able to speak to us. But then with COVID, we didn't feel comfortable putting people on planes, we didn't want people to like risk their lives to come talk to us. So it ended up being that we kind of narrowed it down to whoever was like within driving distance of LA or San Francisco. And did the rest. There was a few women that couldn't come to us that we just did fully remote. So those are used a little differently. The timeline was very helpful with that. That kind of gave us a device to show the wide range of all of these women's stories. So we couldn't go into as much depth as we did with like Eden and Lily, and Lisa a lot, but we still wanted to give them space. So, and also to let the decade spanning of all of it, like how early it started and how late it occurred. And then also showing it at the exact same time as all of these professional accomplishments, like it wasn't a separate thing, like, especially with like Eden's story and Lily's, he wasn't America's Dad, from 9 to 5, and then a Predator from 5 to midnight. It's like it was interwoven into his career, and he using his career to further, commit these crimes allegedly. So anyway, that's a long way of saying that the remote workflow was set up, and then remote shooting was set up, and then by 2021 we were able to travel and shoot again a little bit in person, which is how we ended up in Philadelphia the day that Cosby got out of prison. There was like the one day the whole year we were in Philly to shoot interviews with Sonali, our sex therapist, and then also a prosecutor who didn't show up that day because she was, on CNN talking about him getting out of prison. So it was a very long process. The remoteness of it was challenging just because it is such an emotional story and such a dark story. So it was hard to not be in person, and we tried to establish as much of a connection with the survivors as possible by, you know, doing pre-calls and making them feel as comfortable as possible, giving enough space to fully tell their story, having enough space for Kamau to warm up and get to know them and not just jump right into like, okay, here, tell me about the most traumatic, you know, experience of your life. And then, okay, bye. So there was a lot of care that went into that. But yeah, I mean, the pandemic was not.
It wasn't the best way to go.
It wasn't helpful. Yeah, it wasn't helpful.
Kamau, I wanted to bring it to you because the format of the show, in some ways, I think was a happy or not happy accident, but serendipitous, whatever you want to call it, that certain things just sort of came, I think, through production that just aided this. And that's why, like, we're sitting here talking about its 4 Emmy nominations, including for Best Nonfiction Series, is because of these careful decisions, which also led to, I think, interesting and incredible narrative things, which you can't plan that you're going to be in Philly the day that this happens. But that is obviously such a huge part of how this story is told in this setting and then continues to be told. Just take me into that day for you in that moment, because I have a feeling on top of everything else that was just a beyond surreal moment. To know everything that you've been talking about up to that point, literally for years, has completely been recontextualized with this last day of filming.
Yeah, so we had just finished with Sonali, and it was like I think we left that in there where it's like, all right, see you, thanks, and you sort of, and there's that moment of like, all right, one last interview, like sort of like this is it, whatever this thing is, which it didn't feel like it. I still didn't feel like, oh, we got it. Like it's still like, this is, I'm not sure if I should be doing this, if I can pull this off. I believed in my team, I didn't believe in myself, and so there's just this idea that like, I don't know how we're going to finish it, but this is the last interview. At least we will have what we have and figure it out. And I think we all sort of had that moment where everybody, like after an interview, runs to their phones to check their, you know, whatever and da da da. And then I think we all sort of had the moment where like we almost like we all thought we were the only person in the world to get this message when it was just blowing up on Twitter and every news app that Bill Cosby was going to get out of prison. First, it was like he's going to get out today. Then it was like he's going to get out soon, and it's like, oh, he's out. Like it sort of happened very quickly over the course of an hour. And you know, I think I ran around like I sort of thought, my phone, I got a text from a friend of mine actually who was like, your documentary just got more interesting. And so then I went, yeah,
wow,
he's a comedian, so that it makes sense that it would come through that way.
Very true. Yeah.
And so I looked, not a comedian I asked to be in it, I want to be clear, but I looked and suddenly it was like everywhere, and it felt you know, it sort of felt like, it felt insane. It felt insane because you would think that, because at first I felt, did we miss something? Was this something that we should have known was going to happen? But it became very clear very quickly that nobody was nobody on the defense, on the prosecution side was ready for this. Nobody of the survivors that we had talked to, we'd been talking about like things that might happen, but nobody was saying this. And so it was a surprise to all of us. And then it was like, well, is the prosecutor going to come that we're going to talk to? And I was like, there's no way she shows up. She did not. And then it was like, well, what do we do? And suddenly we became like some sort of like breaking news team with the nicest cameras ever, because we had these giant red cameras. And it was like, let's go pursue the story. But it was like, but we don't do that. Like, it was just that we sort of were thinking on our feet. And then as Katie went out with, our cinematographer, Hans Charles, who should have been Emmy nominated, as they went out, there was this moment where Hans is like, are you going to come with us? And I was like, no, I don't think so. And he was like, oh yeah, I forget you're famous sometimes. And I was like, yeah, I can't just go be on the scene. And then I went back to my computer, had a Zoom with everybody who was back in LA and the edit team and the production team, just to talk, like just to sort of like, because we all had gotten this message, and it was just like, no agenda, and very much like, look, this clearly shifts some things, but we're not going to do anything today to figure that out. And really, like, I'm trying to be big on this, and please, Katie, wait. It's like, this is a moment where I don't expect anybody to like get back to work. Like, let's all just be and figure this out, and nobody's going to expect you to turn in whatever you're working on today. Let's all just sort of process this.
Yeah. And yeah, Katie, I wanted to talk to you, and then I also wanted to talk to you, Eden, about how that changed your participation in the doc a little bit afterwards and how it recontextualized things. But yeah, Katie, talk about that day, because like it's the moments in the doc, like we get to see all of this, which I think is so surreal just as a viewer. I can only imagine because you still had a job to do in certain respects, even though you were told very kindly by your leader that like, you know, we don't have to in certain ways. I think obviously we saw that you guys did do stuff that made the doc even more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it was a very weird moment, and I just had the instinct of picking up my iPhone and I just started rolling on Kamau, and we did end up using some of that footage. I think there was additional footage of Kamau laying on the ground that we did not use. But, you know, it was just a moment of like, what is going on? This is not expected. This was not, it was not something on our radar whatsoever. And just the fact that we were there. So yeah, we just kind of did become a breaking news team. We still weren't sure what was going on and where he was. So I initially went to the prison itself with just like a random guy with a camera, because Hans was still, we thought maybe that the prosecutor was still coming. So I just kind of broke off with this, you know, guy I hadn't met, which during COVID times is also weird to like just get in the car with a stranger and go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the time we got to the prison, we eventually found out there was other breaking news teams there, and they kind of gave me information that he'd already been released. So this happened very fast. So then we went to his home, to Cosby's home, and which is this, you know, very lovely home in a leafy suburb of Philadelphia. And there was already a bunch of news crews there, and there was a few of the survivor related activists and protesters, two of them there. So they were the only ones kind of there to speak the voice of the survivors and to say like, this is not something to celebrate. But the women I was standing next to at the end of Cosby's driveway, waiting for him to come out with his lawyers and his publicist to give a statement, they were cheering for Cosby, and they had signs that said, "Don't mess with Bill." And, you know, here's these women next to me, like literally touching shoulders with me, cheering for him and saying negative things about the survivors. And for me, having already met a lot of these women in person and just through their footage and absorbing their stories, it was very emotional for me and very sad. But then on the other side, to have this man who was, you know, I did grow up with Bill Cosby being like America's dad. I grew up in the 80s. I watched the Cosby Show every Thursday with my family. Seeing him in person, I said to Kamau later on the phone, like through tears, I was like, I didn't wake up today expecting to be in the presence of Bill Cosby. Like never throughout this journey of making this show did we expect to sit down with him, because he was in prison. And so that, I just was a mess after that. Like we shot our footage and he walked back into his house, and then and it was also like 110 degrees in Philadelphia, humidity. And I just like collapsed under a tree, and this like CNN reporter like kind of gave me shit for it. He was like, "What's this? What's your problem?" And I'm like, "I'm not a breaking news reporter. Like I'm not used to being like in it with traumatic events, you know, like
and that's telling. And that's very telling about how you guys chose to tell this story in contrast to them, because I don't know if anyone has ever seen the movie Nightcrawler. They just moved to the next accident. It's just to the next tragedy, and they approach it in a totally different way. And the one thing I can say, having watched the doc, having seen everyone speak about it, is that's not how they approach this. And I think Eden, again, in that moment, you didn't know when you were sitting there in 2020 mid-year doing this interview that by the time they finished filming, that interview and everything you said would be completely different under the guise of this new information. But I'm just curious for you, how did that affect your thoughts about participating in it? Because you were very, you know, open to say that, you know, at first this was a harder decision for you maybe to speak out. And I'm just wondering, did that change it in any way, or did you feel, regardless of knowing that outcome, you were happier that you participated? Like, how did it change it for you, or did it?
Well, I could imagine what Katie and Kamau and the team were, you know, because it had been shot and it had been quite a while since that had happened. What was happening for most of us, or many of us women, that certain reporters or journalists knew that they could get in touch with us. We were on the phone with them, calling, asking how did we feel about him getting out of prison, and on the phone with each other, clamoring to be supportive to some that needed more support than others. And then sure, in the background, because none of us ever knew when this was coming out. And so Katie and Kamau, you know, I think all of us had our own ideas of what it was going to look like as well. But it was in the back of your mind, you know, you sit down, you talk to someone that you feel comfortable talking with, and you tell the truth, and you just tell what happened, which you know, both of you guys, I just want to say congratulations. And you did a really stellar job of the overview of what you said you were going to do and what you did. And I appreciate that very much. And some of the women's stories, just to let the three of you know, all of us have met each other at different times. Some of us have formed friendships, and some of us know each other just certainly tangentially, or, you know, from being in this very, very surreal group of women that will always be this group of women. I have never heard some of the women's stories a full arc like that, with you just holding the camera on them and letting you giving them an opportunity to tell the story from top to bottom. And I thought that not only was that a brilliant choice, but it was compassionate, and it was more than anybody has ever given any of the women, in my opinion. Yeah. And I really appreciated that. And certainly I know that you had talked to me about my full story, but I didn't know whether you would use it all. And you shared everyone's stories. And so I hadn't cried about it other than like real tears of, oh my God, I can't believe what happened to the other women. For me, I have, I certainly have my feelings about it, and I've had tears about it. But I cried when I was sitting in a little teeny apartment on the coast of Italy as I watched it for all of those women's stories. And so him getting out of prison, you know, actually was not as shocking, because, you know, this whole thing wouldn't have happened had he not had the celebrity that he had he not had the bubble of protection, had he not had the system that he was part of, and therefore he got out when he got out. I mean, actually, it really wasn't surprising. Sadly, it wasn't surprising that he got out early. Certainly it was a shock. But
one thing I will say, which I think is the thing that this series stands up to, which is that in that moment, or in any moments when people want to see something that is a complete, thorough retelling of both who he was, what he did, and how we are dealing with it, this series stands as a testament to that. The 4 Emmys stand as a testament to that, and everything that you guys did are a testament to that. So thank you all so much for doing it. And I want to thank you all for watching today. I want to remind everyone that We Need to Talk About Cosby is eligible for voting in 4 categories: photo editing, directing, best narrator, and best nonfiction series. Thank you all again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Eden.
Thank you. Thanks, you guys.